Thank you. Good evening. I just wanted to say a couple of personal memories and stories that have been passed on to me through people dear to me. And firstly is a story of Captain Frank, who was my great-grandfather. He was a man who was born in Watchet in Somerset in 1871. He became a master mariner, very, very skilled in those days, sailing those big, difficult sail ships. And effectively he was a member of the Merchant Navy. And we'll pick up the thread, if you like, once he was 45 years old, and he was in the First World War. And I take it from this book, which has been recently written about Charlestown, his hometown near St Austell. He'd been master of several vessels. They included the Flora Emily, the Laura Ann, the Helen Tregenza, and the Conoid and the Thomas Alien. It was aboard the Conoid he experienced a life-changing event. The Conoid had been built at Peterhead in Scotland. She was originally a three-masted schooner. In 1916, she'd been converted to a two-masted schooner down in Cornwall. Her first voyage was on the 23rd of March of that year. She was carrying a cargo of clay from Foy to Rouen in France and Normandy. The weather was bitterly cold. She was about 3.5 miles north of the Barfleur Light off the Normandy coast when a German submarine surfaced, the UB-40, and started shooting at them with a deck cannon. The Conoid soon started to sink by her head. Her mainmast came crashing down and smashed the ship's rowing boat. Fortunately, they'd been towing a rowing boat astern as well. They managed to get aboard this rowing boat, and the men were 2 days in this tiny boat before they reached the French coast. Frank had later said that if it hadn't been for the mate who'd never stopped rowing, they would have all surely perished. The crew were cared for by French fishermen until they were able to return to England. Unfortunately, Frank's life savings went down with the Conoid. It was part owned, which was really unusual for a master mariner to become a part owner of one of these ships. It's normally owned by very rich people of the time. Despite attempts, unfortunately, they were unable to receive compensation for the loss of their beautiful ship. And at that age, 45 years old, was a life-changing event. He was very, very lucky to survive. But he then he gave up the Merchant Navy at that point, and he started a fishing business, and he owned a fish shop and a wet fish brand, and he also built a house for him and his family to live in. So he didn't say, woe is me. He was a great man I admire very much from where he came from, and despite the issues that war threw at him, he managed to come through it and carry on. So that is my great-grandfather, Captain Frank Larcombe. And the second person, which is, I was talking to my friend in Germany about this, and I've got a long history with Germany, and I stayed with the same family from the age of 12 to quite late into my adulthood, and as a sort of exchange situation, always the same family, and I came to know them very well. And the father of the house where I stayed was actually a U-boat sailor, the Kriegsmarine as it was called, and his story is quite an interesting one in that he was 16 years old, joined up to German Navy, trained in the U-boats, and went aboard. If you imagine a 16-year-old, although it's what we would consider to be our enemy at the time, it's a very human story, and he was at sea for only a few short weeks before he was torpedoed by the Royal Navy, surfaced, and luckily survived. And he spent his years from 16 to 20 in a prisoner of war camp in Sheffield. And amongst that time, he was well educated man. He could speak German, he could speak English, which was strange for a German at that time, and therefore he was quite useful to the guards to sort of be able to relay and communicate to them. And one of my dad's final stories, and this is very much a friendship story that can come out of adversity, he'd actually befriended a sergeant also called Ken, Sergeant Ken, and towards the end of the war, he stayed there until 1946, and Ken actually, when the war was over, used to take him, and he enjoyed a pint of English ale, did Werner, when he was allowed to go to the pub. And my father actually tracked down Sergeant Ken in the late 70s and reunited them, and he said it was one of the most heartwarming things that he'd ever done in his life. So there's just a few memories there, and I agree with what Jonathan said at the start. We need to keep these memories alive, because I was of a generation that was dominated by parents whose lives had been dominated by the Second World War in particular, and it's good that we pass these stories on. So thank you very much for listening.